Lately, it's hard to escape discourse about artificial intelligence, especially in the art world. And I mean art world very broadly, not just behind the hallowed walls of the institutions. Because I, like many contemporary artists, find that I'm not allowed behind the velvet rope. No, I'm talking about artists, musicians, writers, etc., both professional and passionate amateurs alike. What I've been hearing and feeling is a real existential fear that has many of us asking, why even bother? This is a huge problem, because art is the antidote to this generic, technocratic dystopia that we find ourselves in, and which is exactly why we all need to bother now more than ever. As I understand it, AI art is essentially a computer program drawing on a library of material, learning through inputted prompts, but it is limited by what material it has access to. It is bound by the limitation of human output, and there is a limit to that human output. Much of what we experience is not expressed externally, let alone artistically, and therefore a computer remains ignorant to it. Carl Jung referred to this shared pool of human experience as the collective unconscious, and unbeknownst to the robots, it is the ultimate open source. I'm not an intellectual, so I'm going to let the brilliant David Lynch explain what I'm talking about.
There's an ocean of pure, vibrant consciousness inside each one of us. And it's right at the source and base of mind, right at the source of thought, and it's also at the source of all matter. Ideas come to us. We don't really create an idea. We just catch them, like fish. No chef ever takes credit for making the fish. It's just preparing the fish. So you get an idea, and it is like a seed. And in your mind, the idea is seen and felt, and it explodes like it's got electricity and light connected to it, and it has all the images and the feeling, and it's like in an instant you know the idea. In an instant. Then the thing is translating that to some medium. It could be a film idea or a painting idea or a furniture idea. It doesn't matter. It wants to be something. It's a seed for something. So the whole thing is translating that idea to a medium.
It's the answer to the question that every artist inevitably gets asked. Where do you get your ideas from? Sometimes we don't want to be honest, in fear that the truth lessens our ability somehow, that it's not some kind of inherent creative genius. But even the origin of the word genius refers to a spirit attendant, like a guardian angel, that gives one a natural ability, which I find very interesting. There's magic hiding in our very language. Even the academics can't escape it. Now, how can we access this ocean of ideas? Obviously, I can't just hop into the magic school bus and journey into the unconscious. At least not literally. And this is where another AI comes into play. The AI that I believe could potentially cure the wounds created by artificial intelligence.
Squidward, we don't need television. Not as long as we have our imagination.
Jung believed that there was a way to bridge the conscious and unconscious world by using active imagination. This means engaging with your own imagination as a form of mental exercise or meditation. This concept may sound childish, and at its heart, it is. As children, we practiced active imagination like it was as natural as breathing, until one day you get painfully aware that you're doing it, and suddenly playing pretend is for babies. It's something that I encourage you to relearn as a grown-up. It's just like riding a bike. The more you do it, the easier it gets, and the more you'll get out of it. Jung suggested approaching our exploration of this abstract subconscious realm as a shamanic experience, interpreting what we see or experience there using methods like painting or automatic writing. Play freely, but take notes. Jung said, "The patient can make himself creatively independent through this method. By painting himself, he gives shape to himself. It's a great way to get to know just how weird you really are." I have real problems meditating, quieting my mind, even just sitting still. But I find that painting, while engaging in some active imagination, is a real tonic. Here are some examples of the paintings I've done in the past year using this method. Personally, they're some of my favorites, but in some ways, because of the process, they don't even feel like I've painted them. They are surreal images, and creating them feels very surreal as well. It's more like reading tea leaves or channeling spirits, as if they already existed inside the paper. I'm not illustrating an idea or trying to translate it onto paper. I force myself to let go of any expectations from a finished piece. I have no roadmap, no idea where I'm going. My paint is my lantern, and my paintbrush is my walking stick. Some people call this method intuitive painting. There are no rules. It's all about the process versus the product. It's the healing nature of the act of creation, which is the opposite of the mandate of AI art. The computers may have taken our jobs,
but they'll never take our freedom!
It's also a very peaceful and relaxing way of painting. No worries, no expectations. It's healing to paint just for myself, with the goal of making myself feel better, or even getting to know myself better. In the act of painting, figures start to appear through the layers. It's almost like developing film from a dream. I'm always surprised to see what comes through. Who are these strange creatures? I don't know what any of this means now, but maybe in 20 years, I'll have some insight on current day me. Maybe I'm predicting some kind of biblical apocalypse.
You know, Quasimodo predicted all this.
And even though some of the creatures that appear do have a bit of a be not afraid vibe, I'm approaching this process as more of a metaphorical exercise than metaphysical one, although the act of creation always does feel like magic to a degree. I always wonder if showing the sausage being made takes away some of the mystery. Although thinking about it, I don't think I actually believe that. I love watching artists work and talk about their work. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples of how I create these intuitive paintings, and how I practice active imagination to explore the creative parts of my brain that I can't always access. The first step is picking a color. I have a little book of swatches of all the paints that I own that I made out of a small photo album. Then I set the mood. I love making it into a little ritual. I'll make a coffee, maybe a little treat. I light some incense, put on some relaxing ambient music, usually lo-fi video game music with no lyrics, and I try my best to clear my mind, flipping through colors until something resonates with me. Lately I've been starting my paintings with the Paul Rubens fluorescent watercolors because I love the way that they show up through the paint layers. It makes the shapes pop out, making them easier to catch. Next I try to make my brain as blank as the page. I let all my silly little thoughts melt out of my ears like hot wax. Sometimes it takes more than 1 cup of coffee before I'm ready to start. The blank page can be intimidating, but not as much with this kind of painting, because I don't need to think about what's going to fill it up. The next step is getting color on as soon as possible. Once this first layer is on the page, the journey begins. It's almost like the painting is invisible at first, and won't show up unless you throw paint on it. This makes this exercise my go-to for overcoming creative blockages. When I can't think of anything worth painting, I return to this strange world and start taking notes. It started off as a landscape, these paintings often do, but that didn't feel quite right. By mushing around the paint a bit, you can sort of reset the picture like an Etch-a-Sketch, making new shapes and patterns. Though I have to make sure the paper I use can withstand the kind of overworking that this process requires. For this little painting, I'm using Strathmore 400 series cold press paper, which is pretty inexpensive, especially if you have a Michaels coupon. There's something challenging about filming this process, other than the fact that being watched makes me forget how to function as a human, is the lighting. Usually, shapes come through better with moody dark lighting, And if I wasn't filming, I'd be doing this in very low light. This is not only very relaxing, but the shadows really help things show up through the paint. It feels almost like a witchy process. It has to be insulated and isolated. I always feel very awkward and self-conscious when I know I'm being perceived, but I've been working to overcome this. I think it's more important for me to share how much fun painting can be, rather than being taken seriously as an artist. There's nothing more absurd than an artist that demands to be taken seriously, and in my experience, it leads to talking about your work more than actually working, which is very boring. When I'm painting like this, I'm not thinking about anything going on outside the borders of the page, except maybe when I stand back to choose the next colors. I work on pulling the picture out, bringing it more into focus. So let's take a look at the result. It's not my favorite painting, but I still do like it. From these random characters and elements, a little story starts to take shape. And it's one that sort of wrote itself, as if it was happening in another dimension. In analyzing it, I'd say that this orc character got so startled by this budgie phoenix exploding out of his castle that his gardening hat got blown off. He's a sweet, sensitive orc who just grows flowers and minds his own business. I'm really glad I got to meet this guy. So now that I've hopefully illustrated to you what I meant by intuitive painting using active imagination, let's try this in a bigger piece to see what comes through. As a sort of votive offering to the muses floating around in the collective unconscious, I'm using my favorite paper, Arches Cold Press. It's 100% cotton and can take a lot of abuse, which is perfect for me. I see some artists paint so delicately with watercolor. Traditional Chinese artists can create a masterpiece with a single brush stroke, but I just have to accept that it's not my style. I'm messy and rough with my supplies. I have no formal training and absolutely no idea what I'm doing. But never let that stop you from creating. Never ask for permission to make art. You are free. This paper also smells like chocolate milk when it's wet, which I like. When making art just for the joy of it, I find that it's important to use the supplies or tools that feel good to use. Sometimes that means using the good or pricier stuff. I have to fight off a little twinge of guilt when playing around with it. There's a nagging voice accusing me of wasting it, that I should be saving my supplies, my good supplies, for only my best work. But who can predict when that will happen? Not me. But I found that it's worth fighting through that feeling, building up some little defiances, because enjoying what I'm doing in the moment helps me to let go and find my way to that Zen state of pulling things through the veil of paint. And sometimes, inevitably, this process is a failure, but only if I hated the process of painting it. If the painting itself is boring or incomprehensible or ugly, that's less of a failure, since, as I have to remind myself, this isn't about a finished product. I'm not looking to profit from this work per se, it's more personal. And this leads me to a little rant, if you'll indulge me. As an artist, social media is a real double-edged sword. On one hand, I love how much great art that I get to scroll through every day. But on the other hand, I think that instant access to millions of works of art has led to a lack of appreciation for the work itself and the work that went into the finished piece. The brain can only take in so much. And now with AI art, the process appears irrelevant when a customer only wants the finished piece. I certainly felt demoralized. But that's just illusory, because it's also easier to show your process. And I think if you can prove that a human made something, some people will inevitably want to pay a little more for it. Wall Street has controlled the art market since the 80s at least. The government controls the institutions. And don't even get me started on that dystopian nightmare. I'll trust a Terminator before I trust the government. In terms of art and living as an artist, I say leave the concept of productivity to the machines and run into the forest never to look back, at least in the absolute freedom of your imagination. But that's not taking into account that there are some of us who feel that there's nothing else we can do in life but to make art. We otherwise unemployable freaks. AI art represents a looming threat to artists that manifests as an abstract fear and eventually evolves into a spiritual illness, which inevitably feeds into mental health, or rather devours it. I want to resist. I want art, or more specifically the practice of making art, to be a useful part of the fight against tyranny, and at least, if nothing else, making weird things outside of the agendas of the institutional gatekeepers has always infuriated the people in charge, and that is something to be proud of. I want people to keep making things for no other reason than they want to, because they feel specifically that there's nothing else worth doing, until the very idea of art becomes a verb that specifically excludes non-humans. Although give it time, and that statement will probably get me canceled by our future alien overlords with all these recent UFO sightings. In my opinion, AI art presents an economic problem rather than an existential one. Just because there's no money in art, at least for the artists, doesn't mean it's not worth making. I used to make my bones making fan art in commission at conventions, and as much as I loved the people aspect, after a few years, the work itself did not nourish my soul. So when the pandemic hit and the convention circuit was no longer an option, I decided to quit. It's not like the money was stable or reliable anyway. I just got to the point where I felt like I needed to make my own art or I'd die. But in order to do that, I had to let go of the idea of making money from it, which is really scary. I was so used to measuring the worth of my art by what people were willing to pay for it. There are even helpful formulas to calculate what you should be charging. Now I love nothing more than giving my art away to my loved ones, making gifts and cards. It makes my paintings feel even more valuable somehow. Recently, my friend's 10-year-old daughter told me that although she loves making art and writing, she didn't want to do it as a job. Instead, she wants to be a hairdresser when she grows up, because she enjoys doing it. And besides, she said, I don't want to be forced to do something that I love. Damn, this kid is way smarter than me. These are lessons that took me 30 years to learn. Every single day, I either hear something or learn something that makes me astonished at how little I actually know. Now I only want to make art that speaks to my soul. And yeah, that might be making fan art sometimes, but at least it will be a genuine expression of my love for a piece of media. Making art solely for money is a trap, and I'm just not going to compete. It's exhausting enough to be an artist sometimes, let alone having to justify why I'm even doing this. I don't know. I just have to. I say, as humans, we need to retake the practice of artistic creation as a form of healing, as a form of higher communication with each other and with ourselves. We are all individuals, but we are also connected to each other through millennia of shared experiences. And what if we could harness this collective unconscious to heal the lost and the suffering? It costs nothing to try but paint and time. The world is burning. Let's not pretend otherwise. AI can take over creative industries, but unless things get really dark and dystopian, we all still have access to that human source where all ideas and collective dreams and experiences dwell, and it can't be used up. And as long as humans exist in the universe, it's a truly renewable resource that binds us all together. Now more than ever, I implore you to create. Don't worry about looking good, don't worry about impressing people or what they'll think, but it's just never been more necessary for humans to make art.
Here's where it makes the most sense. You need it so you don't forget.
Forget?
Forget that there are places in the world that aren't made out of stone, that there's something inside that they can't get to, that they can't touch. It's yours.
What are you talking about?
Hope.
I hope that I inspired you to pick up some paint and to play around, or that my weird process might be helpful to someone going through a creative block or fear of the blank page. Please don't be afraid to make weird stuff and share it. Stay human, and thank you so much for watching.